Rachel froze, her breath catching as she stepped into the living room. There they were, again. Muddy paw prints smeared across the pristine white rug she had vacuumed just hours earlier. Her jaw clenched, eyes scanning the tracks that led from the back door to the foot of the stairs. The storm outside had barely eased, and yet Shadow had vanished once more, only to return unseen, soaking wet and muddy, as if nothing happened. She crouched down, pressing her palm against one of the prints. Still damp, still fresh. "Shadow," she whispered under her breath. "How are you doing this?" Behind her, she heard a faint jingle, the sound of a collar, the ghost of movement. But when she turned, the hallway was empty. Rachel stepped into the backyard, her flashlight beam cutting through the foggy air. She swept it across the high wooden fence. The gate stood closed, latched, just like it had been every other night. She knelt, tugged at the lock to test it. Secure. No signs of digging under the fence, no loose boards. And yet, somehow, Shadow kept slipping out into the cold night and returning before dawn, like a phantom. She turned to find him sitting at the edge of the porch, calm, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, fur still damp. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. "You're hiding something," she muttered. Mornings bled into evenings without meaning. Rachel's life in the quiet cul-de-sac had become a loop of hospital shifts, microwaved dinners, and empty silences that echoed louder than the sirens she used to hear in the city. She poured her coffee alone, ate alone, returned home to an equally silent house, save for the soft clinking of Shadow's paws as he paced. She had once dreamed of a peaceful life. Now she wasn't sure if peace was just another word for feeling nothing at all. He had come with a file full of hopeful promises, trained, calm temperament, perfect for emotional support. But Shadow rarely met her eyes. He stayed near the windows, tense, distant, as though her home was just another stop in a long journey he never wanted to be on. She tried to connect, offering treats, soft words, walks through the neighborhood. Still, there was a wall between them, an invisible line he wouldn't cross. Sometimes she wondered if he even knew her name. Shadow didn't sleep like normal dogs. He dozed lightly, always facing the front door, ears twitching at the faintest sound. A passing car, a creaking branch, distant footsteps. At night, Rachel would wake to the soft sound of his nails tapping across the wooden floor as he patrolled the house. It was more than restlessness. It was searching. What was he looking for? What was he waiting to hear? The way he stared into the distance, like he was remembering a voice he hadn't heard in a long time, made Rachel's chest ache. She sat on the stairs, arms wrapped around her knees, watching him lie near the door, silent, unmoving, loyal in presence but emotionally absent. Her throat tightened. "I thought maybe we could help each other," she whispered into the stillness. "But maybe you don't need me. Maybe you never did." She hated how broken that made her feel, because the truth was, she needed him, and that kind of vulnerability felt terrifying. Rachel hadn't slept through the night in months. The house was too quiet, the silence too loud. Her bed still had the imprint of someone who would never return. Some nights, she would sit on the edge of her bed, listening to shadows pacing downstairs, and wonder if maybe they were more alike than she thought. Wandering, waiting. Maybe they were both stuck in the same grief, just speaking it in different languages. It was just past 2 a.m. Rachel had dozed off on the couch with a book half open on her lap when a sound sliced through the silence. Scratch. She sat up, heart thudding. Scratch. It came again, soft and deliberate, from the back door. She rose slowly, eyes narrowing as she moved through the hallway. As she opened the door, Shadow was there, wet, panting, with something clutched gently in his mouth. A worn red collar. Torn, faded, but unmistakably carrying a name tag. Rachel's breath caught. "Where did you find this?" The clock blinked at 2:47 a.m., but Rachel lay wide-eyed in the dark, her hands clutching the blanket like it could silence the storm inside her. Ever since Shadow, the black Labrador she'd adopted 6 months ago, started disappearing in the early hours, unease had seeped into her bones. She had checked the doors, the windows, the backyard gate. Everything was locked. Yet somehow, every morning, Shadow would be curled on the front porch, muddy and cold, as if he'd returned from a secret world. Tonight she couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, grabbed her old DSLR and mounted it above the back door. She didn't know what she was hoping for, only that she needed to know where he was going. And why. The following morning, Rachel sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the laptop perched on her knees. Shadow lay beside her, tail gently tapping, unaware he was the star of the footage playing before her eyes. The timestamp read 5:03 a.m., the moment her pulse skipped. There he was, nose pressed against the frame of the locked door. With impossible ease, he nudged the bottom corner, slipping through a space she hadn't noticed before. Rachel leaned forward, jaw tightening. Shadow paused outside for a heartbeat, then darted into the thick silver fog that blanketed the yard, vanishing like a ghost. The next morning, long before the sun even thought of rising, Rachel stood at the door in her winter coat, boots laced tight, camera slung over her shoulder. Her breath clouded in front of her, matching the tension in her chest. Shadow sat beside her, his ears alert, tail still. When she opened the door, he didn't hesitate. He bolted forward, just like in the video. This time, Rachel followed. Branches creaked above, the wind biting at her skin as she trailed him through the neighborhood and across the frost-covered grass. She had no plan, no map, just a growing need to understand what called to him every morning with such quiet urgency. The terrain thickened as they crossed into the woods beyond the town's edge, an area she barely remembered existed. Shadow moved swiftly, ducking under branches, leaping over roots with a grace that contrasted Rachel's awkward stumbles. She winced as a low-hanging limb caught her cheek, but she pressed on. Her fingers were numb, her breath ragged, but she refused to lose sight of him. Each step forward was a step deeper into a mystery she didn't yet understand, one that tugged at something unspoken inside her. Shadow was running towards something, or someone. Suddenly, Shadow halted. Rachel ducked behind a wide tree, peeking past its bark. In the clearing ahead sat a bench, splintered and sagging, swallowed by moss and time. Behind it, the outline of a cottage stood silent, half collapsed, windows dark with age. Shadow moved to the bench and sat beside it. Not restless, not curious, just still. His tail lay flat, his eyes focused on nothing and everything at once. Rachel held her breath. This wasn't just a detour. This place meant something. And Shadow, he wasn't waiting, he was remembering. Rachel stepped closer, her boots crunching softly over brittle leaves. That's when she saw it. Shadow had something in his mouth. Gently, reverently, he placed it by the bench, a child's sneaker, tiny, faded blue, the rubber sole peeling at the edges. One of the laces was nearly chewed through. It looked impossibly old and heartbreakingly loved. Shadow lay beside it, curling around it as if shielding it from the wind. His body curled tight, head resting against the fabric. His eyes closed, not in sleep, but in silent vigil. Rachel's heart twisted. She realized then this wasn't just about instinct. Shadow was holding on to something he couldn't let go of. A memory, a bond, a ghost that still haunted him. Later that morning, back in town, Rachel stepped into the corner grocery store. Her cheeks still flushed from the cold, her mind racing. She approached the man at the counter, hands trembling around the photo she'd taken of the cottage and the tiny shoe. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know anything about this place? Just outside the woods?" The man took the photo, his expression tightening. A shadow flickered across his features. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I know it well." The shopkeeper set down the photo and leaned against the counter, eyes distant. "That dog, he's Shadow, right?" "Yeah, he used to belong to a boy named Matthew. Sweet kid, lived with his granddad in that old place. They were inseparable. Always out exploring, especially near the lake." He paused, jaw tight. "About 3 years ago there was an accident. The boy, he drowned. They never figured out exactly how. But Shadow, he was with him when it happened. Afterward, he disappeared. Everyone thought he ran off." The man looked at her, voice softer now. "But maybe he didn't run. Maybe he stayed, kept going back, waiting for someone who'll never come home." Back home, Rachel sat on the porch with Shadow curled beside her, the little sneaker in her lap. Her fingers traced its frayed edges as her vision blurred. She thought of her own son, Liam, of his laughter that once filled this house, of how empty it had felt since the accident. Shadow nudged her hand gently, as if sensing the storm inside her. And in that quiet, shared space of loss, something shifted. Rachel realized she hadn't rescued Shadow. He had found her, because he knew what it meant to lose someone you loved more than life itself. And he stayed, just like she would now. Rachel noticed it first on a cold Tuesday morning. Shadow didn't flinch when a car passed too close, or when the wind rattled the trash bins down the alleyway. The tremble in his limbs, so constant in those first weeks, had dulled. But something lingered, something heavy behind those deep, amber eyes. Sorrow. It wasn't defiance that made him dart away from her touch that first day. It was pain. Rachel had assumed he was skittish, maybe feral, running from everything and everyone out of instinct. But now, watching him sit by her porch like he was waiting for someone who'd forgotten to come back, she understood. He wasn't just lost, he was grieving. Rachel crouched beside him, her fingers hovering before brushing gently over the scar above his eye. Shadow didn't move. His eyes stayed on the horizon, on something only he could see. That was the day Rachel stopped trying to fix him and started listening. Every morning they took the same path. Shadow would lead, ears perked, tail steady. But no matter the weather, no matter the detours, he always ended up there, at the bench beneath the gnarled oak tree by the creek. Rachel had never paid attention to it before. Just an old rusted bench tucked away in a forgotten corner of the trail. But Shadow treated it like a sacred place. He would sit there in silence, body still, eyes locked on the empty seat beside him. Rachel followed his gaze one morning and felt it, something lingering. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a presence that had once filled that space now lived only in Shadow's memory. A scent, a voice, a hand that used to rest on his head. She sat beside him for the first time that day, unsure of what she was honoring, but knowing somehow it mattered. They stopped speaking entirely on their walks, not out of discomfort, but out of respect. There was peace in the quiet, in the crunch of gravel beneath their feet, in the wind brushing through trees, and in the way Shadow would occasionally glance back to make sure she was still behind him. Each step they took was a step away from their respective pasts and toward something new, something neither of them fully understood yet. Rachel didn't ask questions anymore. She didn't force affection. She simply showed up. And so did he. It became a routine, an unspoken agreement. She would bring the leash, he would meet her by the door. Together, they'd walk to the bench, sit for a while, and then walk back, closer each time without ever needing words. Sometimes the deepest connections don't need to be spoken. They walked. One morning, Rachel noticed it. A single daisy, wilted and browning, tucked into the slats of the bench. It hadn't been there the day before. Shadow sat beside it, head bowed slightly as if in tribute. Rachel didn't understand its meaning, but her chest aches when she sees it. It felt like a memory had been laid down, quietly, reverently. The next day she brought a stone from her garden, smooth, round, and warm from her pocket. She placed it gently beside the daisy. Shadow sniffed it once, then looked at her, not with confusion, but something like approval. Day by day they started leaving things, a feather, a pebble, a torn glove. No explanations, just offerings. Rachel didn't realize it then, but she was slowly laying down her own grief beside his. Piece by piece, she was learning to let her heart be seen. The sky was overcast the morning it happened. Rachel had barely slept. The anniversary had crept up again, the day she lost her brother. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the leash, her eyes stinging before they even reached the bench. She didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of anyone. But as she sat down, the sobs came like a flood. No warning, no restraint, just raw, unfiltered grief spilling out into the morning air. Shadow didn't flinch. He didn't move away or look confused. Instead, he stepped up beside her, pressed his side against her leg, and leaned in, solid, warm, and wordless. Rachel cried into the crook of her arm as Shadow rested his head on her knee. That was the first time she realized they weren't just sharing space, they were sharing sorrow, and maybe healing. Their bench visits became more than ritual, they became refuge. Rachel no longer questioned why she went. She needed it, the quiet, the companionship, the mutual understanding that didn't demand explanation. Shadow stopped looking for someone else to show up. His eyes, once fixed on the past, began to soften when they met hers. Sometimes they stayed for 10 minutes, sometimes for hours. But they always left lighter. They were two souls carrying invisible burdens, broken in different ways, but mending through each other. And in that quiet space beneath the tree, where no one else seemed to see the magic, they were learning how to breathe again. Together. It came in a plain white envelope, slipped through the mail slot like any other bill or flyer. Rachel opened it absently, sipping coffee as the morning sun warmed the windowsill. But her hands froze mid-sip as her eyes scanned the words. Shadow was once named Duke. He had an owner, a family, a home before all of this. And now someone wanted him back. The letter was from the daughter of his previous owner, an elderly man who had passed away months ago. The daughter, having finally tracked Shadow through a local vet record, wanted to reclaim her father's dog. Rachel's breath caught. The words on the page blurred. It wasn't anger she felt, it was panic, deep, soul-shaking panic. Would Shadow have to leave? Everything they had built, every step forward, every silent bond, they weren't ready to let go. Not now, not yet. Rachel stood by the bench, letter crumpled in her coat pocket, watching Shadow chase a leaf across the path. He didn't know. Couldn't understand. To him, this was home now. But was she stealing him? Holding on to something that didn't belong to her? She closed her eyes, guilt battling fiercely with love. He had a life before me, she reminded herself. I don't own him. But her heart whispered something else. He chose me. Rachel looked at the daisy still tucked between the bench slats, now dry and fragile, and felt the weight of something sacred. Shadow wasn't just a stray she'd taken in. He had become her lifeline, her mirror. He may not have started as hers, but didn't love make him so? The deadline approached. The woman wanted to come by next week. Just to see him, the message said. Rachel smiled bitterly, just to see him, as if he were a forgotten sweater in a lost and found bin. She watched Shadow sleep that night, curled at the foot of her bed, twitching in some dream. She reached down, brushing his fur with trembling fingers. What would be right? Returning him to his past, or keeping him in the life they'd built together? Love isn't about ownership, she knew that. It's about what's best for them. But when love is the thing that's finally helping you heal, how do you let it go? She didn't have the answer yet. But as Shadow stirred, opening his eyes to look up at her with quiet trust, she whispered, I'll figure it out. I promise. The morning had started in its usual stillness, birds singing faintly beyond the dew-kissed windows. But the sudden crunch of tires on gravel shattered the calm like glass. Shadow, curled at Rachel's feet by the porch swing, shot up. His ears perked, his body stiff as a board. A sleek silver car slowed to a stop in the driveway. Shadow didn't bark, he didn't move, he just stared. Two figures stepped out. An older couple, dressed in well-pressed coats, eyes scanning the house. One held a manila envelope in hand. The other clutched a faded photo. Rachel stepped forward, heart sinking. She recognized them instantly, her late brother's in-laws. Shadow's tail lowered, his muscles coiled like a spring. Rachel whispered, It's okay, boy. But it wasn't. Shadow sensed it. Something was about to change, and whatever it wasn't welcome. The couple began walking toward the porch, cautiously, their voices soft and sweet. Shadow, hey there, boy, it's okay. The woman cooed, extending a hand. Shadow let out a low, guttural growl. His body pressed tightly against Rachel's legs, shielding her, unmoving. The man tried again. He remembers us. We just want to say hello. Rachel could feel the vibration of Shadow's growl in her own bones. She reached down to touch him gently, but he didn't relax. His eyes remained locked on hers as if asking, Why are they here? Why now? The woman looked at Rachel. We have papers. He was our grandson's dog. Legally, he belongs with us. Rachel's heart clenched. Shadow's loyalty had never been clearer. Rachel stepped in front of Shadow, shielding him the way he had just shielded her. Her hands trembled, but her voice held. I understand, she began, eyes locked on the envelope. I know what the law says. She swallowed, her voice cracking. But Shadow, he's been through enough. He lost his boy, and then he found me. He chose to stay. The couple exchanged glances. I'm not trying to erase the past. You can come visit any time, but please, look at him. She gestured to Shadow, still at her side, eyes watchful, unwavering. He's not just surviving here, he's healing. So am I. For a long moment, no one spoke. Just the soft creak of the porch in the breeze, and the ache of decisions no one wanted to make. A low rumble rolled through the sky, far off but growing louder, like the storm inside each of them was being mirrored by nature. The man's jaw clenched. The woman looked down, eyes moist. We only wanted to honor his memory, she said. I know, Rachel replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But Shadow didn't budge. His presence was a silent declaration. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and stirring the weight in everyone's chest. Finally, without another word, the couple turned back toward the car. The door closed. The engine started. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. The sky had opened by evening, rain tapping gently against the roof. Rachel had lit a fire, setting Shadow's blanket near the hearth, but it remained untouched. She called for him through the house. Shadow? Bedroom, kitchen, garage, nothing. Panic surged. Then she saw it. The back door, slightly ajar, just enough. Her breath caught in her throat. No, no, no. She raced outside, heart thudding like a war drum. No paw prints, only mud and rain. Shadow had vanished, swallowed by the night. Something had changed in him. The visit, the memories, the ghosts. And now he was chasing them. Alone. Lightning slashed the sky as Rachel plunged into the woods, her boots sinking into soaked earth. Branches slapped her face, but she didn't stop. Shadow! She screamed into the roaring storm. Shadow, please! Her flashlight cut through sheets of rain, illuminating nothing but the skeletal trees ahead. Fear clawed at her throat. Had he gone to the boy's old home? The lake? Her voice cracked. Don't do this, not now. Every drop of rain felt like blame. Every gust of wind felt like guilt. She stumbled, slipped in the mud, hands scraping against roots. Still, she got up. The only thing that mattered was finding him. Somewhere, out there, her dog, their dog, was lost. Hurting, maybe worse. And she wasn't going to lose him, too. Rachel skidded to a halt as the faintest sound reached her ears, barely there under the wind and rain. A whimper. She froze, listened. There it was again. She turned toward the lake. Her flashlight quivered in her hand, the beam bouncing off wet rocks and reeds, and then fur. A glimpse. Shadow, she cried, sprinting down the slick path. He lay curled beside a fallen log, drenched, shivering, his paw twisted unnaturally beneath him. Baby, no, she gasped, collapsing beside him. His eyes met hers, clouded with pain, but alive. He had tried to return to the only place that felt like home before her. She stroked his soaked fur, whispering, I'm here. I've got you. As she reached to cradle him, something fell from his mouth. A small, faded toy. Half buried in mud, soaked, chewed. Rachel blinked against tears. It was a blue rubber dinosaur. The same one that had sat on her late nephew's dresser all those years. Shadow must have hidden it, keep it, never let go. Rachel's breath hitched. He hadn't run away because he forgot. He ran because he remembered. The toy was more than a keepsake. It was a tether to a boy he couldn't stop loving. She gently picked it up. Her fingers trembled as she held both of them close. The storm faded into a soft drizzle as Rachel dropped beside Shadow, wrapping her coat around his trembling body. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears mingling with the rain on his fur. You've been carrying him with you all this time, but we can't live in the past forever. Shadow whimpered, burying his nose into her chest, the toy pressed between them. She pressed a kiss to his head. We loved him. We always will. But we still have each other. And in that moment, wrapped in mud, grief, and rain, they stopped surviving their pain and began healing it. With her arm around him and his injured paw cradled gently, Rachel helped Shadow to his feet. He leaned into her, limping, trusting. The walk back was slow, branches cracking beneath their feet, wind whispering through the trees, but they moved forward, together. No more running, no more hiding. Each step was heavy but full of meaning. Shadow paused once to look back at the lake, then pressed forward, his eyes locked on the porch light flickering in the distance. That night, they didn't just find each other. They chose to move beyond the pain, into something whole, something new. The early morning sun filtered through the old oak tree, casting golden flecks across the earth. Rachel knelt quietly, her fingers trembling as she cradled a handful of flower seeds, small, fragile things, like memories waiting to bloom. The wooden bench stood beside her, newly sanded and painted in soft blue, the boy's favorite color. It was here, under this very tree, where he used to sit and talk to the wind, telling stories to no one and everyone all at once. Her late husband's laughter once echoed here too, deep and warm like a fireplace in winter. She pressed the seeds into the soil, whispering their names with each gentle push. Each one held a memory: laughter, tears, promises, pain. The silence around her was broken only by the rhythmic sound of Shadow breathing at her side, head resting on his paws, eyes watching her every move with unspoken understanding. As she patted down the earth, she whispered, "This is for all of us, for what we lost, for what we found." Nestled beneath the cluster of marigolds and forget-me-nots, Rachel placed a smooth, hand-carved stone. It wasn't perfect. The letters were uneven, the lines a little shaky, but it was hers. 2 names were etched into the surface: Lucas and Daniel, her son, her husband. Below them, a simple phrase: forever in the heart, always in the light. Shadow brushed his muzzle gently against the stone as if offering his own tribute. Rachel smiled softly. The garden wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was real. It was love, grown from grief, shaped by hands that had trembled from sorrow and steadied with purpose. It was the kind of monument that didn't need height to carry weight. They stood quietly, Daniel's sister, Lucas's cousins, people she hadn't seen in years, but who had come when they heard. Their eyes scanned the garden, lingered on the stone, and finally rested on Shadow. Rachel spoke through tears. "He stayed. When no one else could, he was there when I couldn't be." There was a long silence. Then a voice cracked, "He saved you too, didn't he?" Rachel nodded. One by one, they knelt. They touched the flowers. They touched the stone. And as they stood again, something shifted. The tension in their shoulders eased. The bitterness that had once clouded the air was gone. "He belongs with you," Daniel's sister finally said, her voice breaking into a smile. "He already has a family." The walls of the grief center were soft, with colors meant to soothe, but it was the quiet courage in people's voices that drew Rachel in. She began by pouring tea, listening, sharing fragments of her own story when words were too heavy for others to find. "I lost everything," she'd tell them, her voice steady, "and somehow I found something new." Her grief became a bridge, raw and imperfect, but sturdy. People crossed it, found hope on the other side. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was guiding others toward the light. And every day before she left, she'd pat Shadow's head and say, "Ready to go help some hearts today, partner?" His tail would thump once. There was always enough. A boy huddled in the corner of the center's playroom, face buried in his knees, shaking. No words reached him. No touch soothed him. Until Shadow walked in. He didn't bark or whine. He just approached slowly and lay down beside the boy, silent, steady, warm. The boy's sobs slowed. One small hand reached out. Fingers buried themselves in fur. Rachel watched from the doorway, her breath catching. She'd seen that scene before, in her own living room, in her darkest night. Shadow wasn't just comforting, he was healing. That day, the boy finally spoke. Not to the counselors, not even to Rachel, but to Shadow. "Thank you." And the old shepherd, once broken by his own sorrow, thumped his tail gently in reply. The park buzzed with life. Kites in the sky, music drifting from a nearby gazebo, and the sparkle of soap bubbles floating like tiny worlds. Shadow chased them, bounding through grass like a pup, children giggling in his wake. Rachel sat on a bench beneath the same oak tree, sunlight warming her face. Her hands were clean now, no dirt, no tears, just joy. She laughed. A deep, unrestrained laugh she hadn't known she still carried. For once, the echoes in her heart weren't memories of what she'd lost, but sounds of what she still had. Hope, healing, a home. Shadow used to run in his sleep, legs twitching, whimpering softly, always searching. For something. For someone. For safety. But lately he just sighs, sleep deeply without fear. He doesn't bolt when the door creaks, doesn't flinch at thunder, doesn't pace by the window when Rachel steps outside, because he knows she's coming back, because he knows he's not going anywhere. Rachel watches him now, curled by her feet as the sun sets. Her hand strokes his back, and her heart finally feels still. "He's home," she whispers. And Shadow, as if he's waited his whole life to hear it, lets out a soft, peaceful breath. The sky was painted in soft strokes of gold and lavender, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath in reverence. Rachel sat still, her hands resting in her lap, as the first rays kissed the earth. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't chasing thoughts or memories. The storm that had once raged inside her had quieted. Beside her, the world exhaled, and she exhaled with it. Not just a new day, but a new beginning. The pain was still there somewhere, but it no longer screamed. It whispered now, familiar, but not consuming. She let her thoughts drift to the long nights, the silence that once suffocated. But they felt distant now, like a season that had passed. Rachel no longer lived in the shadow of her grief. She had stepped into the light beyond it. She glanced down. Shadow was there, always there, curled into her side, his breathing calm and rhythmic, as if he too felt the peace in the morning air. His head rested on her lap, just like he had done the night she found him, shivering, lost and alone. That moment had changed everything. What began in desperation had grown into something unshakable, a quiet, enduring love. People spoke of rescue as a one-sided act, but that wasn't true for them. Shadow had filled the hollow spaces in Rachel's heart, just as she'd given him a home when the world had turned its back. They were broken things that had found healing not through fixing, but through understanding, through simply staying when it mattered most. She hadn't gotten over it. That phrase always felt wrong. Grief didn't leave you, it changed form, and Shadow had taught her that she didn't have to carry it alone. In his eyes, in the soft weight of his head, she found quiet solidarity. Her sorrow became bearable, not because it lessened, but because someone else, someone loyal and wordless, carried it too. Rachel smiled gently, thinking of how far they'd come. The hurt that once consumed her had become a part of her strength. The days she thought she'd never survive were now chapters in a story that led her here. Shadow hadn't just helped her endure, he helped her transform. They didn't erase the past. They honored it. And from its ashes, they built something new. They sat on the old wooden bench under the oak tree, where she used to cry alone. Now, it was surrounded by blooms, wildflowers she and Shadow had planted together last spring. Once, this place had been a grave of memories. Now, it was a garden. What had marked an ending had quietly become a beginning. The beauty around them was not despite the pain, but because of it. The wind rustled through the leaves, warm on their skin, no past, no future, just now. Rachel and Shadow, whole at last.